Marcus Williams was 37 years old, earned $61,000 a year as a senior HVAC technician, and at 10:23 p.m. on a Tuesday night in late August, he learned his marriage was over. The lesson was delivered not with a tearful confession, but with the cold, final click of a deadbolt sliding into place. The sound echoed in the humid Charlotte air, a period at the end of a sentence he hadn't even known was being written. He stood on the porch of the 1,400-square-foot Plaza Midwood bungalow he had bought with his own money, the key turning uselessly in the lock. His hands, calloused and stained with grease from wrestling a faulty commercial condenser unit all day, felt clumsy and foreign. He knocked, a gentle rap at first. "Bree? Honey, you in there?" Silence. He knocked again, harder this time. The solid oak door, a $2,200 expense he'd insisted on for security, didn't budge. "Brianna, open the door. My keys aren't working." Her voice, when it finally came, was muffled but sharp, stripped of any warmth he might have once recognized. It was a voice honed by her sister Simone, filed down to a point and aimed directly at him. "There's a mattress in the hall, Marcus. You can sleep on the floor or you can get out. Your choice." For a moment the words didn't compute. Mattress in the hall? Get out? He peered through the small glass pane next to the door. The entryway light was on, casting a sterile yellow glow. And there, just past the foyer table where they kept the mail, was the undeniable proof. A cheap $150 twin mattress, yanked from the guest room, was laid out on the cold, gray-painted floorboards. Piled beside it was a mountain of his belongings. His work clothes, his worn-in jeans, his collection of Charlotte Hornet snapbacks. On the very top, like a flag planted on a conquered hill, sat his favorite $60 Carhartt hoodie. He felt a sudden, dizzying wave of nausea. This wasn't a fight. This was an eviction, an exile. He was being thrown out of the home he had poured his soul into, the home for which he had handed over a cashier's check for $94,215, every penny of his inheritance from his mother, supplemented by a decade of grueling overtime shifts. Brianna's name wasn't on the deed. It wasn't on the mortgage. It was his house. And yet, here he was, locked out. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot poker twisting in his gut. He had no idea just how calculated this cruelty was, or what was about to unfold. But in that moment, under the dim glow of his own porch light, he made a decision. He would not beg. He would not bang on the door. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of approaching rain, and turned his back on the life he thought he knew. He got out. Have you ever felt so completely blindsided by someone you trusted that it knocked the wind right out of you? Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to pick yourself up from a betrayal that deep. The house on Hamilton Place had been his dream long before it was hers. For years, he'd driven his 2014 Ford F-150, its odometer ticking past 150,000 miles, through the tree-lined streets of Plaza Midwood, admiring the restored 1940s bungalows. He loved the quiet pride of the neighborhood, the sense of community. When his mother passed, leaving him just over $70,000, he knew exactly what he would do with it. He spent 2 more years working every overtime shift he could get, adding another $24,000 to the pile, living on a shoestring budget, his lunches packed in a worn-out cooler. When he finally had the $94,000 down payment, he took Brianna to see the house. It was a modest 2-bedroom, priced at $380,000, with good bones but an ancient, wheezing HVAC system he knew he could replace himself. He saw a future there. He saw a yard for a dog, maybe kids one day. He saw a home. Brianna saw a project. "The kitchen is a gut job," she'd announced, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the laminate countertop. "And these floors are a tragedy. We'll need to sand and stain them a dark espresso." She walked through the rooms he saw as full of potential, and all she saw were flaws to be fixed with money he didn't have. Her vision was grander, shinier, more expensive than his. It was a vision shaped by her older sister, Simone, a woman who lived in a different world entirely. He remembered the day he signed the papers. He sat in the lawyer's sterile office, his signature firm and clear on the deed, then on the mortgage application. The loan officer had asked if he wanted to add Brianna to the title. Marcus had hesitated. They'd only been married a year. His mother's voice was a whisper in his ear, a memory of her pragmatism. "Protect what's yours, son. Love is a feeling, but a deed is a fact." He'd politely declined. "Just me for now," he'd said. Brianna, who was busy scrolling through paint swatches on her phone, hadn't even looked up. She had made a critical mistake, and at the time neither of them knew it. Their life in the bungalow settled into a routine that on the surface looked like happiness. Marcus worked long hours, his hands perpetually rough, his body tired. He'd come home to the smell of a dinner Brianna had ordered from DoorDash, the containers often from places with names he couldn't pronounce. He would eat his $18 pad thai while she picked at a $24 salad, her eyes glued to her phone, scrolling through images of pristine, white-on-white interiors. He paid the $1,850 mortgage every month from his personal checking account. He paid the utilities, the property taxes, the car insurance on her $48,000 Acura RDX, a car he'd had to co-sign for because her credit was a wreck of forgotten student loans and maxed-out store cards. His contributions were tangible, foundational. Hers were aesthetic. She bought a $300 fiddle leaf fig tree that died within a month. She ordered a set of 6 minimalist art prints for $800 that he thought looked like paint spills. She insisted on a $4,000 custom walk-in closet system, which he painstakingly installed himself over 2 weekends, following a complex Swedish diagram until his back ached. He filled his half with durable work shirts and a few neatly pressed suits for church. She filled hers with brands he'd never heard of, dresses with 4-figure price tags hanging in protective plastic. His world was built on labor and savings. Hers was constructed from appearances and credit. The first real crack in the facade appeared during a dinner at Simone's condo in South Park. Simone's home was a testament to curated wealth, a 2-bedroom rental in a glass tower that cost $3,500 a month. Everything was gray and chrome and smelled faintly of gardenias from a $150 diptyque candle. Simone, a regional marketing manager for a cosmetics firm, carried herself with an air of bored superiority. She looked Marcus up and down, her eyes lingering on his $89 Timex watch. "Marcus," she said, swirling a glass of expensive white wine. "Brianna tells me you work in air conditioning?" "HVAC," he corrected gently. "Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning." "Right," Simone said, a small, dismissive smile playing on her lips. "It must be so physical." Marcus felt Brianna shift beside him. He waited for her to defend him, to say something about how hard he worked, how he was a senior technician trusted with major commercial accounts, how his skill kept entire office buildings from melting in the Carolina summer. Instead, she just laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Oh, you know my Marcus. He loves getting his hands dirty." The comment stung more than Simone's condescension. My Marcus. As if he were a pet project, a charmingly rustic accessory. He looked at his wife, her beautiful, luminous, dark skin, glowing in the soft light of the condo, a $2,400 Burberry dress draping her frame perfectly. She looked like she belonged there, among the chrome and gardenias. He suddenly felt like an intruder, his simple, steady love no match for the glittering ambition in her eyes. He had no idea how wrong he was. that his simple steadiness was the only real thing in the room. The dinner at Simone's was a turning point. After that night, the small fissures in their marriage began to widen into chasms. The cruelty, once veiled in passive-aggressive comments, became more overt, more dismissive. Brianna started spending 3, then 4 nights a week with her sister, coming home near midnight, smelling of Simone's expensive perfume, a $280 bottle of Chanel No. 5, and the faint scent of cocktails from whatever upscale bar they had been to. When she was home, a wall of cold silence stood between them. Marcus would try to bridge the gap, telling her about his day, about a tricky rooftop unit he'd wrestled with, or a funny exchange with a customer. She would offer a non-committal, her focus entirely on the sleek screen of her new iPhone 13 Pro, a $1,100 device she'd put on their shared credit card without discussion. He found the bill for it tucked into a Neiman Marcus bag in her closet. It was on the same statement as a $1,200 charge for a Givenchy handbag. The card was supposed to be for emergencies only, a safety net with a modest $5,000 limit. He approached her that evening while she was getting ready to go out again, the new purse sitting on their bed like a trophy. "Bree, we need to talk about this," he said, holding the paper statement. His voice was calm, not accusatory. She didn't even turn from the mirror where she was applying a precise line of eyeliner. "Talk about what?" "This charge. $1,200. This card is for emergencies, like if the car breaks down." She finally turned, her expression one of profound annoyance. "Looking presentable isn't an emergency to you? Marcus, my sister networks with important people. I can't show up carrying some cheap bag from Target. This is what women like me do. This is an investment in our future. You wouldn't understand? What I understand is that this is a bill we can't afford," he said, his voice still even. "My last paycheck was almost entirely for the mortgage and the Acura payment. There's not much left after that." She scoffed, a sound that was pure Simone. "Maybe if you had a more ambitious career, we wouldn't have to worry about what's left. You're so simple, Marcus. You think so small." The word simple landed like a punch. It was her new favorite descriptor for him. His taste in music was simple. His friends were simple. His belief that you shouldn't spend money you don't have was simple. He was a simple man, and she was a woman with complex needs that his $61,000 salary could no longer satisfy. The arguments became more frequent, each one chipping away at his sense of self-worth. One Saturday, 2 of his oldest friends, Derek and Leon, came over to help him clear a fallen branch from the backyard. They were good men, a plumber and an electrician, men who had known Marcus since high school. They worked for 2 hours in the heat, refusing any payment other than cold beers and pizza. As they sat on the porch, laughing and talking about their kids, Brianna came out, dressed for an afternoon of shopping with Simone. She didn't acknowledge Derek or Leon beyond a curt nod. Later that night, she let him have it. "I was so embarrassed," she hissed, pacing their bedroom. "Your friends with their loud trucks and their dirty boots, they don't fit the image of this neighborhood." "They're my family, Bree," Marcus said, his patience wearing thin for the first time. "They were here helping me, helping us." "Why can't you have ambitious friends?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why can't you know lawyers or consultants? All they talk about is overtime and fishing. You're dragging me down, Marcus. I have potential, real potential, and I'm stuck here with a man who thinks a good weekend is fixing a leaky faucet." Each word was a carefully chosen weapon, designed to inflict maximum damage. He felt a profound weariness settle over him. He was a good man. He was a reliable husband. He was a skilled tradesman who took pride in his work. But in her eyes, he was nothing more than an obstacle, a blue-collar anchor holding her back from the life she felt she deserved. He didn't know it yet, but she had already decided to cut the rope. The week leading up to the lockout was the coldest. She was a ghost in their home, speaking only when necessary, her answers clipped and devoid of emotion. She spent every night at Simone's, claiming she needed space to think. He tried to start a conversation, to understand what was happening, but she would just shake her head. "I can't talk to you right now, Marcus. You wouldn't get it." The night he was locked out, he'd called her on his way home from the job in Ballantyne. "Hey, I'm heading out now. Should I pick something up for dinner?" "Don't bother," she'd said, her voice flat and distant. "I've already eaten." He didn't know that as she spoke, she was dragging his clothes from the closet he had built, piling them up in the hallway like trash for collection. He didn't know that her sister Simone was on the other end of the phone coaching her. "Be strong, Bree. You deserve better. The floor's good enough for someone like you." A phrase Brianna would later adopt as her own. He had no idea what was coming. He just drove home, tired and hungry, to a house that was no longer his home. The rain began to fall as Marcus walked away from the house on Hamerton Place, a soft drizzle that quickly intensified into a downpour. It soaked through his thin work shirt in seconds, plastering it to his skin. He didn't have a jacket. He didn't have a change of clothes. He had his wallet, his keys to the F-150, and a profound hollow ache in his chest. He got into his truck, the engine turning over with a familiar, comforting rumble. For a few minutes, he just sat there, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers the only sound, watching the rain wash over the front of his house. The lights were on in the bedroom, his bedroom, casting a warm, inviting glow that felt like a mockery. He could have banged on the door. He could have screamed her name, demanded to be let into his own home. He could have called the police. But what would he say? My wife locked me out? The thought of the ensuing scene, the neighbors peering through their blinds, the shame of it all, was more than he could bear. The quiet, legal finality his lawyer would later champion was already taking root in his mind. This would not be a screaming match on the lawn. This would be a quiet, methodical dismantling of a life built on a lie. He drove aimlessly for a while, the neon signs of Central Avenue blurring through the rain-streaked windshield. He ended up at an extended stay America off Independence Boulevard, a place of transient lives and sanitized anonymity. He paid the clerk $95 for one night, using the credit card that was solely in his name. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The bed was hard, the pillows were flat, and the air conditioner, an ancient wall unit, rattled loudly. Marcus, an expert in its mechanics, could diagnose its ailments just by the sound. A failing compressor clutch, probably a refrigerant leak. In his own home, the air was always perfectly cooled, the humidity perfectly balanced, because he had installed a brand new $9,000 Lennox system himself. Here, in this lonely room, the air was just as broken as his heart. He lay on top of the thin polyester comforter, fully clothed, and stared at the textured ceiling. He didn't sleep. He replayed the last few months in his head, every dismissive comment, every condescending look, every extravagant purchase. It was a pattern he hadn't seen clearly until now. This wasn't a sudden implosion. It was a calculated demolition. She had been tearing down their marriage brick by brick, and he had been too busy, too tired, too trusting to notice. At 6:47 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from Brianna. "Where are you?" He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keypad. Part of him, the part that still loved the woman he thought he'd married, wanted to pour out his pain and confusion. But another part, a colder, more strategic part, took over. He needed to feign normalcy. He needed to gather his evidence without tipping her off. He typed back a simple, non-confrontational message. Stayed at a motel. Long night. Left my work phone charger on the nightstand. Can I swing by after my shift to get it? Her reply came back almost instantly. Don't. I'll be out all day with Simone. I'll buy you a new one and leave it on the porch tomorrow. It was exactly what he expected. Cold. Controlling. She didn't want him near the house. She was establishing her territory. He typed back, "Okay, thanks." He felt nothing as he sent it. The emotional part of his brain had gone numb, replaced by a chilling clarity. He called his boss and told him he had a family emergency, that he wouldn't be in. It was the first time in 12 years he had ever called in sick without a legitimate fever. Then he opened his laptop, a sturdy 5-year-old Dell, and began his work. He didn't search for therapists or marriage counselors. He searched for Best Divorce Lawyer Charlotte N.C. He bypassed the flashy ads and looked for names associated with property disputes. David Chen's name came up repeatedly. A graduate of Duke Law, a black man with a reputation for being meticulous, aggressive, and fair. His office was in one of the glass towers uptown, a world away from Marcus's life of crawl spaces and attics. He booked a consultation for the following day. Next, he logged into his bank account, the one Brianna didn't have access to, the one his paycheck was deposited into. He started downloading statements. 12 months of mortgage payments, each one for $1,850. The electronic record of the $94,215 wire transfer to the closing attorney for the down payment. He downloaded the property tax records from the Mecklenburg County website, showing him as the sole owner. He downloaded the utility bills, all in his name. He compiled everything into a single, password-protected folder on a USB drive he bought for $15 at a CVS. He was building an arsenal of facts, an irrefutable fortress of documentation. Each downloaded PDF was another brick in the wall he was constructing around himself. The pain was still there, a dull, constant throb, but now it had a purpose. It was fuel. The next afternoon, Marcus sat in David Chen's office on the 34th floor of the Bank of America Corporate Center. The view was staggering, a panoramic sweep of the city he helped keep cool. The office itself was the epitome of quiet power. Dark wood, leather chairs, a single, striking piece of abstract art on the wall that probably cost more than his truck. David Chen, dressed in a perfectly tailored $3,000 Navy suit, did not look like a man who had ever worried about a utility bill. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He listened without interruption as Marcus, dressed in his cleanest work polo and jeans, laid out the story of the last 48 hours. He spoke in a low, steady voice, presenting the facts without emotion. When he finished, he pushed the $15 USB drive across the vast mahogany desk. "It's all in there," Marcus said. The deed, the wire transfer for the down payment, the mortgage statements, all of it. Her name is on nothing. Chen plugged the drive into his sleek laptop. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft clicking of his keyboard. He read every document, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, his gaze direct. "Mr. Williams," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on these documents, your wife has no legal claim to this property. North Carolina is an equitable distribution state, which means marital property is divided fairly, not necessarily equally. However, this house, purchased with your premarital and inherited funds, with the deed and mortgage solely in your name, is your separate property." Marcus felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy. "She has made a home there, so she has established residency," Chen continued. "We can't just change the locks. That would be an illegal eviction. But what we can do is treat her as a tenant at will, a long-term guest, essentially, a guest whose welcome has expired." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "We serve her with a formal, notarized 30-day notice to vacate the premises," Chen said, his tone hardening slightly. It will be delivered by a Mecklenburg County Sheriff's deputy. It is official. It is non-negotiable. If she is not out by the deadline, we file for a summary ejectment, and the sheriff will physically remove her. It is clean. It is legal. And it is final. What about her things? The Acura? The car is a marital asset since it was acquired during the marriage, even if she can't afford it on her own. The divorce proceedings will handle that. But the house? Chen said, tapping a finger on his screen. The house is yours. My fee for preparing and serving the notice is $1,500. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled out his credit card. Let's do it. For the next week, Marcus lived in the shadows of his own life. He stayed at the extended stay. The $95 nightly charge a steady drain on his savings. He went to work, losing himself in the familiar mechanics of compressors and ductwork. He acted as if everything were normal. He and Brianna exchanged a few terse texts about logistics. He needed his work boots. She left them on the porch in a plastic bag. She needed him to transfer money into the joint account for groceries. He sent exactly $100, not a penny more. He was playing a part, the dutiful, slightly wounded husband, giving her no reason to suspect the legal machinery he had set in motion. He drove past the house on Hammerton Place a few times after work, parking his F-150 at the end of the block. He saw her Acura in the driveway. He saw lights on in the evenings. Once, he saw her and Simone getting out of the car, laughing, carrying shopping bags from a South Park mall. The sight of them, so comfortable and carefree in his home, sent a fresh spike of anger through him. They thought they had won. They had underestimated him completely. They saw him as a simple man, a pushover, a walking ATM whose only function was to fund their lifestyle. They had no idea that the quiet man in the work truck held a royal flush, and he was just waiting for the right moment to lay his cards on the table. What do you think is the biggest mistake people make when they are underestimated by others? Share your thoughts below. We love hearing your stories of proving people wrong. The strike was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. David Chen had explained the strategy. They would serve the notice not at the bungalow, where Brianna might refuse to answer the door, but at Simone's condo. She would be cornered, unable to hide. Marcus had given Chen the address, the unit number, everything. His only job was to be a silent observer. At 3:15 p.m., Marcus parked his truck in a public parking garage across from Simone's gleaming condo building in South Park. From his elevated position, he had a clear, if distant view of the entrance and the small, elegant balconies that adorned each unit. He'd paid $12 for the parking, a small price for a front row seat to the implosion of Brianna's carefully constructed world. He saw her white Acura RDX parked in a designated visitor spot. She was there. The plan was in motion. He sat in the cab of his truck, the engine off, the windows down. The air was thick with the late afternoon heat. He watched the flow of expensive cars, the well-dressed people coming and going. This was the world Brianna wanted so desperately to be a part of. A world of effortless luxury, funded by someone else's labor. At exactly 3:47 p.m., a black and white Mecklenburg County Sheriff's car pulled up to the curb. A deputy, a tall, stern-looking black man, got out of the car. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace, holding a clipboard and a large manila envelope. Marcus's heart began to pound against his ribs. This was it. The deputy disappeared into the building's opulent lobby. Marcus's eyes were fixed on the fourth-floor balcony of Simone's unit. Nothing happened for a few minutes. Then he saw them. Brianna and Simone stepped out onto the balcony. They were each holding a large glass of red wine. Brianna was wearing a flowing, brightly colored sundress. Simone was in chic, all-black athletic wear. They were laughing, gesturing animatedly as they spoke. They looked completely at ease, queens surveying their domain. Down below, the deputy emerged from the lobby and stood on the sidewalk, looking up. He spoke into the call box next to the main entrance. On the balcony, the laughter stopped. Brianna and Simone peered over the railing, their bodies tensing. Marcus could imagine their conversation, the confusion and annoyance. Who could that be? Simone disappeared back into the condo. A few minutes later, Marcus saw her in the lobby through the plate glass windows, speaking to the deputy. He handed her the envelope. She took it, her posture stiff with indignation. Then she turned and marched back towards the elevators. The next moments unfolded in what felt like slow motion. Simone reappeared on the balcony, the manila envelope in her hand. She gave it to Brianna. Brianna took it, a frown creasing her brow. She tore it open impatiently. She pulled out the single sheet of legal paper. Marcus watched her face. He was too far away to see the fine details, but he could read the story in her body language. First, there was confusion as she scanned the legal jargon. Then her shoulders went rigid with disbelief. She read it again, her head shaking slowly. And then came the dawning horror. Her face, a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She looked up from the paper, her eyes scanning the street below, the parking garage, as if she could will him to appear so she could unleash her fury. She screamed something he couldn't hear, a silent, primal yell of fury. Then, in a gesture of impotent rage, she hurled her wine glass over the railing. It arced through the air and shattered on the pristine concrete walkway below. The sound didn't reach him, but the image was indelible. The crash of the glass was the sound of her world breaking. The quiet, simple man she had dismissed and discarded had just served her an eviction notice from the life she had stolen. And he had done it without raising his voice, without sending an angry text, without a single tear. He had done it with the cold, quiet finality of the law. The first voicemail came through at 3:58 p.m., just moments after the wine glass shattered. Marcus let it go to voicemail, his hands steady on the steering wheel. He would listen to them all later, in order. He needed to absorb them as a sequence, a chronicle of her collapse. He drove back to his room at the extended stay, the rattling air conditioner a welcome, familiar noise. He sat on the edge of the stiff bed and pressed play. Voicemail 1, 3:58 p.m. The voice was shrill, nearly unrecognizable with rage. "What the hell is this, Marcus? What is this supposed to be? Some kind of sick joke? You think you can kick me out of my own house? My home? You have 5 minutes to call me back and tell me this is a mistake, or I swear to God you will regret this. Call me back now." The message ended with an abrupt click. He saved it and waited. The second call came 12 minutes later. Voicemail 2, 4:10 p.m. Her tone had shifted slightly from pure rage to indignant justification. "Okay, I get it. You're mad. I was harsh the other night, I admit it. But this is insane. We're married, Marcus. The law is on my side. This is our house. My sister's lawyer, and yes, I already called him, says this won't hold up in a million years. You can't just evict your wife. You are making a huge mistake. You need to stop this." He almost smiled. My sister's lawyer. Simone's lawyer was likely a specialist in corporate contracts, not property law. She was getting bad advice, clinging to a fantasy of marital ownership that the deed in his name rendered null and void. An hour passed. No more calls. He imagined the frantic conversations happening in that South Park condo, the desperate search for loopholes that didn't exist. Then his phone buzzed again. Voicemail 3:5:22 p.m. The anger was gone, replaced by a cloying, manipulative sweetness that turned his stomach. "Marcus, baby, it's me, please. Please, just call me. Let's talk about this. I've been under so much stress lately. Simone has been in my ear, you know how she is. I wasn't thinking straight. We can work this out, baby. We always do. Don't do this to us. Don't throw away everything we built. Everything we built. The phrase was a bitter pill. What had she built? A mountain of debt? A facade of happiness? He deleted the message. The final phase began with a text message the following week. He had already moved his direct deposit to a new individual bank account. The joint account they shared, which he primarily funded, was nearly empty. Text message, 8:16 a.m. My car payment for the Acura is due today. It's $650. It's trying to auto-draft from the joint account, and it's being declined. There's no money in there. Did you take the money out? You need to put it back. I can't have my payment be late. He didn't reply. The consequences began to cascade, each one a direct result of her own actions, a domino falling in a line she had set up herself. First, there was the house. For 30 days, she lived in his bungalow, a ghost rattling around in a life that was no longer hers. On the final day, Marcus and two of his friends, Derek and Leon, arrived with a U-Haul truck. She was gone, but her things were not. Under the supervision of another sheriff's deputy, they packed her expensive clothes, her minimalist art, her collection of designer shoes, into boxes. They moved her furniture into the truck. They took it all to a storage unit Marcus had rented for 1 month in her name, a $150 expense he considered a final, bitter severance. He changed the locks that very afternoon, a $300 job done by a professional. The house was his again. Second, there was the car. Without his income to supplement the joint account, Brianna couldn't make the $650 monthly payment on the $48,000 Acura RDX. 2 months after the eviction notice, a tow truck showed up at Simone's condo complex and repossessed it. The public humiliation was immense. She was reduced to borrowing Simone's car or taking Ubers. Third, there was the lifestyle. The shopping sprees at Neiman Marcus, the $200 dinners in Uptown, the weekly manicures, it all vanished. She was a guest in her sister's condo, a long-term visitor whose welcome was rapidly wearing thin. Simone had enjoyed having a glamorous sister to go out with. She was far less enthusiastic about having a broke, bitter roommate who couldn't contribute to the $3,500 rent. Finally, there was her social standing. The story, as it always does, got out. The carefully curated image of a successful, stylish woman living in a charming bungalow was shattered. She was now the woman who got kicked out of her own home by her simple husband. The friends who had admired her lifestyle distanced themselves, their sympathy shallow and fleeting. She had built her identity on a foundation of his money and stability. And when that foundation was removed, the entire structure collapsed. He had not sought revenge. He had simply stepped aside and allowed the full weight of her choices to fall upon her. 6 months later, the late spring sun cast long shadows across the freshly cut lawn of the house on Hamerton Place. Marcus stood in his driveway, wiping grease from his hands with a clean rag. The scent of cut grass and honeysuckle hung in the air. The house was quiet, peaceful. His peace. The biggest change was not inside the house, but in the driveway itself. Leaning against the side of his trusty F-150 was a brand new, professionally printed sign. It read, "Williams Reliable HVAC, quality service, honest prices." Beside it, on a pallet, sat the guts of his old HVAC unit, the one he had just replaced. For the past 2 weekends, he had been his own first customer, installing a brand new, top-of-the-line $12,000 Train system in his own home. It was partly for the upgrade, but mostly for the practice of doing a full residential installation as the owner of a company, not just an employee. The idea had come to him during the lonely nights at the extended stay. He had skill. He had a reputation for being honest and hardworking. Why was he pouring all that energy into making someone else rich. With the money he was no longer spending on Brianna's lifestyle, he had been able to save enough to buy the basic equipment, get his business license and insurance, and print a few signs. He had 2 jobs lined up for the next week, referrals from old, satisfied customers. It was a small start, but it was his. A car he didn't recognize, a modest 2016 Hyundai Elantra, pulled up to the curb. Brianna got out of the driver's side. He hadn't seen her since the day her things were moved out. She looked different, thinner. The expensive Burberry dress was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a plain t-shirt. The Givenchy bag was nowhere in sight. Her hair, which she had always spent hundreds of dollars a month to have professionally straightened and styled, was pulled back in a simple, natural puff, showcasing the tight coils he had always found beautiful. She looked less like a magazine ad and more like a real person. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft. She was holding a small cardboard box. "I was just clearing out the last of my stuff from the storage unit. There were a few of your old yearbooks in there. I thought you might want them." He walked over and took the box from her. Their fingers brushed for a moment. There was no spark, no lingering warmth, just the awkwardness of 2 strangers who used to share a life. "Thanks," he said. She looked at the house, then at the new sign on his truck. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Williams Reliable HVAC," she read aloud. That's really great, Marcus. I'm happy for you." "I'm happy for me too," he said, and the words were true. "Listen," she said, looking down at her shoes. "I know it's probably way too late, but I'm sorry for everything, for how I treated you, for what I did. I was lost. I was listening to the wrong people, and I thought having things would make me happy. It doesn't." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt not anger, but a distant pity. She had chased a glittering illusion and had lost the only real thing she'd had. He had forgiven her months ago, not for her, but for himself. Holding on to the anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. He was done with poison. "I appreciate that, Brianna," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I wish you well. I really do." He didn't invite her in. He didn't offer to walk her to her car. The boundary was clear and solid. She was a part of his past, and his future was right here, in this driveway, with his new business and his hard-won peace. She nodded, understanding the finality in his tone. She got back in her Hyundai and drove away. Marcus stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the trees. He looked at the sturdy bungalow, the home he had fought for not with fists or fury, but with paperwork and patience. He realized then that true wealth was never about the dollar amount on a price tag. It wasn't the $380,000 house or the $48,000 car. True wealth was the skill in his hands, the integrity in his heart, and the quiet confidence of a man who could build and rebuild his own life. A house is just wood and nails, a shelter from the rain. But a home, a true home, is the peace you build inside yourself. And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus was finally home. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted is the only way to find what you truly need. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear that their own strength is their greatest asset. Thank you for being a part of our community.